My name's Rob Silver from Pure.Security. We might just wait a few more minutes just to give people enough time to join the session. So we'll just stand by for a couple more minutes and then we'll kick things off. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar on domain hacking from Pure.Security featuring Spamhaus. Just a few things to introduce the session. Pure.Security, if you're not familiar with who we are, we're one of Australia's largest cybersecurity businesses listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, owned by Tesserent Limited. And we provide end-to-end security consulting services and products. Spamhaus being one of the offerings that we provide in terms of threat intelligence feeds. Pure.Security is Spamhaus's main partner and supplier of Spamhaus in Australia, and we're supplying these products to our customers both in Australia and New Zealand. This is the first session that we've launched, and we're planning on running a range of webinars in the future to provide more information and I guess education to our customers on how you can utilise threat intelligence feeds to better protect your organisation from any threats that might be around. So that's all I'll probably say for an introduction. I'd like to introduce you to our speaker today, Matt Stith. He's the industry liaison specialist from Spamhaus. He's been there for some time and offers a wealth of knowledge, not only on the technologies and the feeds available from Spamhaus, but also he's a seasoned anti-abuse advocate and has decades of experience in all matters, including domain hijacking and those sorts of things. So thanks very much for coming along, Matt. I'll hand it over to you and let's get the session started.
Excellent, Robert. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I hope everybody's doing all right today. So I just wanted to start out by just letting everybody know what we're going to be talking about. So first thing we're going to be looking at is just the how, what, and why of domain hijacking. Then we're going to take a look at a few examples. And next we'll look at three pretty high-profile stories that were very visible. There was a lot of research done on them and a lot of explanations around what had happened. And then last, we're going to be talking about what users, what corporations, and what registrars can do to better protect themselves against domain hijacking. And then finally, we'll just do some Q&A. So with that, what is domain hijacking? So what essentially it is these are malicious actors that are gaining access to the DNS records of a legitimate domain that obviously they do not own. And in some cases, these attackers will just show that they've hijacked the regular domain, the root domain of that of the domain that they've hijacked, or they will do something that's called domain shadowing. And what that is they don't change anything about the regular domain, but they create a bunch of subdomains and are pointing those to the malicious infrastructure. And that's not something that is visible on the whois level. When I go through the examples, you'll see what I'm talking about there, about how it's not readily visible to see. So why is this happening? Why are they being exploited in this way? It's because many of these domains have been around for a while. So they have a long age in them. And in the threat intelligence industry, where you're going to be looking at a domain, you definitely look at how old a domain is. If a domain's only a couple of weeks old or a day old, and you see bad things coming from it, it's more likely that you are going to be more strict with the decision-making process and giving it a negative reputation. And then also there's also in some cases the legitimacy of the domain. In some of these cases, some of these domains were being used for legitimate purposes. In a large, overwhelming case of these, a lot of them were domains that people had just lost track of. But there are also other cases where these were actually legitimate domains hosting up legitimate content, and they were being compromised by these malicious entities. And they were doing this so they could get emails and things through without getting extensive scrutiny from content or reputation filters. So how is this happening? Now, anybody who's on this webinar who may have already been into many anti-abuse or security, whatever types of webinars, you've probably seen all of these things before. And the reason that you do is because they work. The people out there that are coming up with these campaigns are becoming more and more sophisticated. It used to be when you received a phishing email, you could definitely spot it instantly because everything was misspelled. It didn't even look like the company. But now they've gotten so advanced that they are making these phishing campaigns indiscernible from what you would actually get from a company. The main difference is they're actually asking you for things that those companies should never ask you for. And then when we look down the line at a few of these other examples, social engineering is something that is happening at the registrars and at corporations, where people are just getting duped into giving more access to somebody that they shouldn't be giving any access to. And then we go down talking about compromised DNS and exploiting weaknesses in applications, and then finally malware. And again, these things work, and that's why this is a main thing of what we've seen on why or on how this is happening. So one thing that I want to talk about before I get into the examples is what passive DNS is. And the reason because of this is because when I was doing research for this webinar, I found that using passive DNS was the main way that I could show and display this data for the audience, so you would be able to see and understand how I was able to kind of find some of these things. So how passive DNS works is essentially DNS servers, they all have this cache in them. And it's in order to provide faster results without having to do a lookup over and over and over again. Think about going to Google or going to Amazon. Every single person on this webinar probably has been to one or the other over the past week. And the DNS resolver just caches that result, so it's not having to do a constant lookup. Now, what passive DNS does is there are these probes that are on DNS resolvers that pick up things that have not been seen before. So it's what we call cache miss data. And what this does is it records that cache miss. The data that's in there is completely anonymized. And then it brings that and puts it into a passive DNS structure. And this is something where you're able to search and look through it extensively, depending on what your tool set is and how you're able to look through that, that data. So without further ado, we're going to look at some examples. The first example that we're looking at here is a domain, exhaleactive.com.au. So this domain was hosted at HostPapa. So here's the NS record, and you can see that we first saw this in 2018, and then we saw it up till the May 24th. And at that time, domain was actually this was the old one, and this is the new one. The thing that is interesting about this is, well, suddenly they were at something that was with HostPapa, and this is an IP that is in that was in the United States, and then suddenly it moved over to this IP that was in Russia. These two NS records are also within this same range. So you can see that it was moved over at or around the 24th of May. So we'll look a little bit more into the whois information. So we do a whois lookup. You see that this domain was registered at GoDaddy, and that the last time that it was modified was on the 25th. So that was when they made the change. So this modification change looks when there are any changes that are made to this whois record. So you see that the name servers right there are pointing to that usnshosting.com, which is pointing towards that Russian infrastructure that's being used by this malicious party. So this is an example of how you can see a domain hijack that has happened. And this is just your garden variety of hijacking. Next, what we're going to look at is we're going to look at something similar. And this is also, again, somebody who is going to that usnshosting.com, being hijacked over to that. But also, they are creating a bunch of subdomains for this. So what you see here is this was hosted at GoDaddy. This is also GoDaddy A record. And then last, it's pointing to that same 217.8.117.8. So we can see that it has been moved, and it was moved somewhere after the 20th, but before the 25th of July. The interesting thing here is now we're going to look at the subdomains. These are all of the subdomains they created. But wait, there's more. There's more subdomains. And there's more subdomains. They actually created 5,500 subdomains. And what they were doing with all of these, we weren't able to see all of the actions that were being taken, but largely it was being used for phishing enterprises. So if you look down here, you have a payment and a payroll. So they were using those types of subdomains to be able to try and trick somebody into falling for their scheme. And the last thing that we're going to look at here for the examples is domain shadowing. So this is where everything looks fine at the root level. So what I mean by the root level is just the regular domain with no subdomains added onto them. And this is another .com.au domain that is hosted at GoDaddy. With that, anything that says domaincontrol.com is hosted at GoDaddy. So it's a little bit trickier to be able to understand what is happening here. But you know, when you do a little bit more digging into the domain, and this is because we were seeing messages coming in to spam traps from this domain, but not from the actual domain. It was coming in from the subdomains. So we did a little bit more looking, and we found that, didn't mention this. You can see here in the whois, it doesn't change. You don't see that change that you saw in that first example where they were hijacking the root domain, but not doing anything with the subdomains. So here's a look at the subdomain that was actually created. Doesn't have anything to do with GoDaddy in here. So a couple of interesting things that they did here was, first of all, it's pointed to that same IP that we were talking about earlier. And then it's using this, this name server. And then the next thing that they added in here is they added in these two name server records that they aren't really pointing anywhere and nothing is pointing to them. I imagine that they would be using these for trying to have a hijack within a hijack within a hijack, so everything is layered up and a little bit more difficult for somebody to track. And the last thing that they added in here is they've added in these MX records. Now, if we were to go and dig in and look at these MX records a little bit deeper, we would see that these MX records are pointed towards Google. So they're pointed towards Google's G Suite. And we're not exactly sure why those are being pointed at. The things that we can assume there is that what they're doing is maybe they're creating a Dropbox. So whenever they send out anything from this domain to try and phish somebody or try and get any malware, they have the mail go back to whatever is being pointed towards here with that MX record, so they're able to see how successful their campaigns are being. So with those examples, we're going to look at another thing here, and this is when we do a right side search within passive DNS, and this gives us a full picture of, you see the domain here, and then you also see all of this stuff being created, these NS records that are being created, and a bunch of other things that are just not within line with what the regular domain is looking like. So it's just there's a little bit of an oddity there, and this is something that a user, if they were monitoring their domain, could monitor their domain looking through passive DNS and be able to see this type of thing. Now, here's an example. Unfortunately, this doesn't have anything to do with the domain examples that I just provided, but this is something that they are sending out. So this is somebody using one of the domains that was hijacked. Of course, this was a little while ago, since you see this email is from 2019. But what they were doing here is they were pretending to be Mondial Relay. And that is a shipping company that operates within France. So what this is really saying here is to say that, look at this, go to this URL, and your package is ready type of scam, which anybody who has received something from the UPSs of the world or DHS has been able to see these types of things being used. But in this example, they're using Mondial Relay, and this domain right here, rx.apebbleintheroad.org, is the domain that was hijacked, and it was pointing towards that same infrastructure. And you see that, yeah, they're using this other domain here that was also hijacked to be able to try and layer that approach. So maybe this domain was more recently hijacked, and they were trying to get past the challenges of reputation, whereas this domain had been hijacked for a while, and they were just using it within the content of the email, because sometimes content is a little bit more difficult for somebody to be able to track into. So this is just an example of what they're doing with these domains. So next, we're going to look at the three incidents. And first one we're going to look at is Open Provider and the fraud prevention company called eHawk. Then next, we'll look at some Middle Eastern entities that suffered a full DNS hijacking, which also hijacked their domains. And last, we're going to look at a case of GoDaddy where we'll look into a little bit more detail on things that Spamhaus has actually seen with GoDaddy, a lot of that from the beginning of the year. So first one is talking about eHawk. eHawk, they're an anti-fraud company. They've been around for quite some time. I know the co-founder of the company. He also works at a block list that is called Serble, and they publish URLs. And he also works alongside me at MOG, which is the Malware Mobile and Messaging Anti-Abuse Working Group. So to frame this up a little bit, Open Provider, who hosted the DNS for eHawk, one of their customer support people was social engineered by a malicious party, and they were able to gain access to ehawk.net's domain account. So the attacker gained access to it. They didn't make any changes. So they just sat on it for a while, more or less to see if there was going to be any issues with anything, or just to see if they could fly under the radar for as long as they did. So they waited about 3 weeks, and then they made their DNS changes. And eHawk, which was monitoring any changes that were happening to their DNS infrastructure, was immediately made aware of the change. And it's essentially because they were using things like passive DNS to monitor their domain to see that if any changes were happening. And they also were signed up for a bunch of other alert systems that were able to just let them know that something was amiss and something had changed. So essentially at that time, they shut down everything that was related to that .NET domain, because that was where everything was feeding in for all of their customers. So essentially, somebody who would hijack this domain, if eHawk didn't catch it, they would see all of the queries and everything that were being sent to eHawk to try and prevent fraud, but they would see all of these requests and be able to see what was showing up, so they could tailor their systems to be able to combat against the fraud prevention that eHawk was trying to do. So one thing to note, and the last thing to talk about this incident, is that eHawk was able to get the domain back in less than 48 hours. The real reason that they were able to do that was because of the industry connections that they had, about the people that they knew. In some cases, this is something that could take somebody weeks to be able to do, because you have to prove that you are who you say you are. And sometimes when somebody has moved everything over to a new provider, being able to convince that new provider that you're the legitimate owner can be sometimes a burdensome process. So, it's always good to make sure that you know people within all of the industries that you're going to be potentially dealing in. And also when you talk with your vendors, be able to understand if they can help you with certain issues like this, if a challenge like this happens with them. And it's always important to just make the best of the connections. And the last thing to say about this is eHawk pretty much did everything right in terms of what they could do with protecting their domain. The unfortunate thing is their DNS provider is the one who got taken advantage of and had their domain stolen. So, it's always important that, you have to keep track of the practices that all of the companies, all of the vendors that you're using, the people that you register with, make sure that you understand, or they understand, how important the security of things is to you, and get a checklist. Make sure that they check all your boxes when you're looking at companies and trying to host things with them. So next on here, we're going to look at the nation-state hijacking incident. And this is something that was published by, it was an article that was published by Brian Krebs, and he's a well-known person within the anti-abuse security community. He publishes many articles and has some very insightful things to say about many things. So a lot of research that I did to look at this issue came from his look into this issue. So looking at this, between 2017 and 2019. Multiple Middle Eastern companies, not companies and governments within Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, and also Sweden, which I know is not in the Middle East, but they were ones that were impacted by this, had their domain DNS settings hijacked. So this wasn't just the domains being giving access to a malicious party. This was their whole DNS infrastructure was hijacked. And multiple entities, you see Cisco, FireEye, CrowdStrike, and the US government warned about this group that they called DNS espionage. And I love how in our industry we like to come up with these fancy names for groups. But this entity, DNS espionage, where people think that it was an Iran group, they gained access to the DNS infrastructure where all of these domains that were hosted by those Middle Eastern companies and Sweden, and they changed the actual DNS settings to point towards a different resolver. So nothing changed with their DNS settings, but the IPs changed. But they didn't notice that because all they were looking at is making sure that all of the records were the same. So they didn't see any of these changes that were happening. And what they ended up doing after they grabbed onto all of these domains is they started putting up fake job websites, malware, files with macros, and then they did all of this stuff to gain that access and to gain more access into the DNS settings to eventually they registered these SSL certificates, so they were able to see all of the traffic that was coming through, where people thought that, okay, I'm encrypted, I'm sending all of this stuff, my certificates are good, and they would send these things, and these they were able to gain access to the passwords and the email messages and see what was going through VPNs that people were using because they had all of the certificates in place. So it isn't 100% clear what all of these actions that were being taken were doing, but mostly it looked like it was to spy on these government entities and be able to see what they were up to gain some type of advantage. But we can only assume because nothing was announced by any of these. But it's an interesting case where, again, an issue happened at a higher level than where it happened with just it wasn't a single company. It was actually the DNS registrar. So the people that had those settings was the one who was compromised. It wasn't those actual government websites and those government companies that were taken advantage of. It was the company that was hosting all of their stuff that made it possible for those malicious parties to gain access. So next, we're going to be talking about GoDaddy. So one thing to say about all of this with GoDaddy, I don't want it to sound like this is a complete bashing of GoDaddy and calling them the worst of the worst and everything. GoDaddy is a great company, but they are the gorilla. They are the largest domain registrar on the planet, and of course, they're sucking up more domain registrars. They just acquired Uniregistry and some of Neustar's domain registration stuff. So when you're the biggest, when an incident happens on the internet and it affects your industry, you're going to be the most visible one that people are going to see. So looking at this, this has a whole timeline with it. So in 2016, a security researcher, his name was Matthew, and what he ended up doing is he found that there was an issue with managed DNS at multiple cloud providers. Cloud providers like Rackspace, like DigitalOcean, where you could make changes without having actually any authorization to a managed DNS portal. So essentially you would create an account and you would be able to gain access to other people's managed DNS. So fast forward to late 2018, this vulnerability is still out there and hasn't been fixed by quite a few people. In late 2018, there were these bomb threat emails that were being sent by these big brand domains, and many, it's domains that were owned by companies that you know. There were a couple of department store domains. I think it was J.C. Penney and a Kohl's. I know that I'm talking to the Australian crowd, but you may know who those companies are. But basically, think about big brand domains, and this is what was sending these types of bomb threat emails. And essentially, there was an article posted about this, talking about how did this happen, what happened here, and people suspected that it had something to do with the managed DNS console. And it was also found that all of these big name brand domains were hosted at GoDaddy. Then in January 2019, Ars Technica and Brian Krebs published a report about the incidents along with these other campaigns that were being sent. And immediately after that campaign, GoDaddy decided to make a public statement saying, okay, we've recognized that there's this issue and we have fixed it. And there was a further look into this by a security researcher who we call RFG. And what he did was he found that an entity who he dubbed as Spammy Bear was responsible for hijacking upwards of 4,000 domains. And it was linked to a Russian infrastructure. And he basically found that all of these domains were, again, hosted at GoDaddy or were registered by GoDaddy and managed by GoDaddy. Fast forward a month later into February 2019, and there was a new campaign that was actually sending out ransomware. And this was pointed out by multiple people within the industry, and it seemed that what had happened was GoDaddy, in their first pass of the issue that had happened with fixing this managed DNS console issue, they missed some of those domains, and they eventually found the rest of the domains, and they snuffed out that issue. So what I would love to say is that this is the end of the GoDaddy problem, but unfortunately it was not. So Spamhaus discovered that the hijacking didn't stop. So somewhere around June 2019, we observed about 10,000 domains that were following along the same patterns that were seen by the Spammy Bear entity. But it was pretty certain that it wasn't a problem with that managed DNS console that had that vulnerability in it. So the big challenge here is that we were able to see all of this stuff that was happening initially by we were getting some of this traffic into spam traps, into honeypots that was coming from these domains that were hijacked, and we notified GoDaddy of the shadowing problem that was happening. And so what ended up happening is once we notified GoDaddy of that, they eliminated that. The unfortunate thing is the attackers switched how they were going to go about their thing. So instead of doing the domain shadowing, what they ended up doing is they just hijacked the domain directly and just changed the name servers over to that infrastructure. And what we were seeing throughout the beginning of the year was upwards of 100 domains daily being hijacked within within GoDaddy's registered space. So of course that's quite concerning. So what you can look at here is, you know, I know that this graph only goes up to April. So one thing that I can say that is great news is that GoDaddy has actually started to really clamp down on this issue that they've been seeing with hijacking. We are still seeing it happening today, as with those first three examples that I provided that were from July and from as early as the beginning of this week. All of those domains are from GoDaddy, but they have definitely taken some steps, and they're definitely doing a much better job at it. So looking a little bit about how Spamhaus tracked this type of thing. So the very first thing that we did was we started intercepting phishing email from these hijacked domains. And it was coming into spam traps and all sorts of other reporting mechanisms that we maintain. So the good news is about that domain domain shadowing, they were able to shut that down. And you know, the way that we are tracking it today is we are still looking at that same infrastructure, that same thing that looks like it is still spammy bare. And we're using our passive DNS to automatically track and put a negative reputation on any of those domains that have been hijacked. So we can instantly protect our users from anything, and also drive awareness to GoDaddy and to those domain owners to let them know, hey, there's something wrong with your domain, or there's something wrong with your customer. You may want to look into that. So now we're going to look into how people can protect themselves. So the first thing we're going to look at is how a domain owner can protect themselves. First thing, and I imagine that you've all seen this before, is turn on two-factor authentication. Now, I understand that you may not be able to turn on the most secure two-factor authentication on the planet, but try and make sure you have something that somebody doesn't just have to enter in a password and then they can get into your kingdom. Make sure that you have something that requires at least one extra step. And I know that sometimes that may seem like it's a pain, but it's always good to have just that little thing in place. And in many cases, you don't have to enter it in every single day. And if you're talking about your domain management, it's not something that you're going to be logging into all the time. Next on here, I know that I talked about two-factor, but you do want to have a strong passphrase management, or you want to manage your passwords with something like LastPass or OnePass, so you can have these long, big generated passwords that are stored for you and is something that you can change as instantly as you need to. And you're not going to have to try and remember all of the millions of passwords that you have to remember in this time that we live in. Next, DNSSEC, which is DNS security, and essentially what that does is it digitally signs your domain. So in the case that somebody does make changes to like an IP of your host name, DNSSEC will trigger in and be able to prevent any damage being done. The unfortunate thing is only about 20% of the internet is using DNSSEC. So more or less, I'm promoting that if you can do it and you have the ability to do it, implement DNSSEC on your at your companies, on your domains, anything that you can do. Next, we're looking at registry lock, which is it's a way that you can set up something where essentially the registrar will have to physically call you to be able to do any changes with your domain. It's kind of like putting a lock on your credit or putting a block on your credit card. Sometimes it only has to be like the number that they have on file that they can call or a specific thing that they can address. So you know, if your registrar offers that, make sure that you use that. Limit the access to the domains, especially if you're in a large organization. So what you want to do there is just, you don't need to have every single person in a 100-person company have the ability to access the DNS management of your domain. It may only has to belong to maybe 1 or 2 people, just to have redundancy. But limit that type of, and then diversify your account security. Make sure that you have people that have certain levels of access when they're able to access the account. So not everybody can do do certain damage to a domain if they're going to access something, or if somebody ends up getting compromised, they're not going to be able to do as much damage as they maybe thought they could do. And then lastly, track changes to your domains and DNS. There are multiple tools out there that are free, like OpenDNS. Domain Tools offers a free monitoring that you can just sign up and just monitor your one domain. Now, if you have multiple domains, it may be something where you're going to have to buy something commercial. And also, this is something where you can use things like passive DNS to track your domain, track any changes that are happening to it. Next, we're looking at protecting networks. And this is for corporations and companies that offer services to their customers. You want to put as many controls in place without, of course, without breaking your budget completely, and also without being too into trying to see what your customers are doing. The first thing that I put on here is net flow analysis. Now, net flow analysis is, that's pretty much you're looking at the traffic as things are going in and out of your network. Now, I know that corporations, that's something that they can do. That's something where you have a security operations center and they can do all of that net flow analysis and see everything that's happening and see if something that was going somewhere at one point suddenly changes to something else. And that's where you can use something like NetFlow to be able to see what is going on. And you can also, with NetFlow, you can put that into something that visualizes like Splunk or like Sumo Logic or the Elk Stack to be able to visualize that type of data. So when something changes, it's very visible. Next, passive DNS. Now, this is something where you can just monitor all the things that are all the entities that you own on your network and be able to see what changes are happening, if any changes are happening. If you're using passive DNS and no changes are happening, that's probably a good thing, because you don't want bad things to happen on your network. But it's also always good to be able to have something like that in your toolkit to be able to monitor. Next, you can implement border gateway protocol feeds, or BGP feeds, and what this can do is this is something that lives on your DNS on your network routers, and it can block things incoming and outgoing from your network. So if there's a known range of botnets, you can block those botnets from coming in, and if anybody gets infected on your network, you can block it from going out. So essentially, you would be protecting yourself from any ingress of malicious activity and any egress of activity. So you'd be blocking it on both sides. Next is DNS firewall, or DNS RPZ, response policy zones. What this does is, this is kind of like a block list, but for DNS resolvers. So what this does is it looks at threat intelligence that lives on a DNS resolver, and if something is listed in that threat intelligence, for example, you receive a Facebook message that comes to you, and it's more or less says, congratulations, you've won the sweepstakes, and gives you a link. So what DNS firewall will do is it will check to see if the domain in that link, or the IP that domain resolves to in that link, is in that in the threat intelligence of the DNS firewall. If it is, it will block that. So you'll be able to protect your users, and also you'll be able to log it and be able to see that somebody actually clicked on a link that was within the threat intelligence in your DNS firewall. So not only will you be able to stop it from happening, you'll also be afforded the ability to turn it into a teaching moment, to say to the customer, or to say to the employee, hey, you clicked on this thing. It could have done a lot of damage to your computer, or could have done damage to the company, and more or less let them understand to be more aware of what they're doing when they're just browsing on the internet and happen to click on things, which leads into the next thing: awareness around social engineering, phishing, and all sorts of other things that are out there. You want to try and keep this type of thing as simple as possible, because I understand that the landscape is changing all of the time, and you're going to be constantly trying to battle with things like, first it was spam, then it was phishing, then it was ransomware. Now we're talking about domain hijacking. You want to, when somebody's trying to get something from you, that's as simple as it is. When anybody's trying to get something from you, you should be aware of what's happening, and if that person is who they say they are, and if where you're going to is the place that you should be going to. And that's really the main things that you should try and do when you're talking about awareness around the things that these malicious people are doing. Last on here, implement DNSSEC. So that's pretty much signing your domains and making sure that they are as secure as possible, so they have that piece in there. Now, last thing that we're going to talk about in terms of protection is protecting registrar customers. Now, this is really pointed towards the registries, the registrars, sorry, that you're going to be doing business with. Now, this is something that anybody in the audience who isn't a registrar, I'm not exactly sure if there is a registrar in the audience, but this is something that you should think about when you're choosing a registrar. Make sure that they tick some of these boxes. And one thing that I have gotten is a draft recommendation from the DNS Abuse Special Interest Working Group that has published this document that has been written by some registrars out there that are some best common practices that they can do to be able to protect their customers. So, the biggest thing, robust reporting on account access. You want to be able to see if suddenly somebody who's always logged in from Australia is suddenly logging in from Canada, and then the next minute they're logging in from Argentina, and then they're logging in from Italy. There's probably something wrong with that account. So be able to track and have that reporting. So if there is an issue, you can report that to the customer, or you can put some rate limiting on that customer's account, make sure that they can't make any changes. So it would be able to protect those customers. Next, high profile, high value domain identification. So if you're one of the large entities, you want to make sure that a domain registrar is going to have that special white glove treatment for your domain. Now, they're not going to be able to do this for every single domain. That's definitely understood, but they will be able to at least look at those really high profile, high value domains and identify if there's an issue. Two-factor authentication, just like I said with what domain owners can do, it just needs to be something that it needs to be there. You need to have it in place, and people have to feel compelled to use it. And then do a regular review of what customers, who customers are that they say they are. Make sure that if somebody's going to change something, make sure they are who they say they are. Don't get social engineered. If you really need to, ask for their passport or ask for some type of government issued ID. And make sure that everything lines up and matches. And then next, social engineering, phishing awareness. Just drive that awareness. You would want, if you're talking to a registrar, ask them, do you guys train against things like social engineering? Is it something that you take into account when you're bringing things on? It's just one of those things that is definitely good for these companies to do. And then the last thing is working with the anti-abuse industry, and that really will mean that they will be out there. They will adopt best common practices when other people within the industry and aren't registrars are identifying issues that are happening at these companies. They'll come up with these challenges and help them bring solutions to their industry. So that's why it's very important to make sure that they work within that industry. So with all that, so the last thing that I want to just look at here is these are some recommended reads. Now, this is stuff that when Robert does a few follow-ups, most likely he'll get you the links to these, so you'll be able to read a little bit more in detail to the challenges that those three issues that I discussed. You'll be able to read a little bit more in depth and see what the problems were and some of the resolutions that happened. So with all that, I am going to hand it back over to Robert so we can do a few questions.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Matt. Great information and really good advice along the way as well. We'll open the session for any questions that anybody might actually have. If you do have any, just drop them in the Q&A tab. That's probably the best place that we'll be able to get visibility of them. While we're waiting for those, I thought I might just say that what I find interesting is no matter how strong you protect your own accounts that you have with the registrar, with strong passwords and the like, it's really interesting that no matter what you do there, you're still potentially susceptible to domain hijacking if the registrar itself is the organisation that actually gets hacked. So there's a lot of things that you can do to prevent it beyond just keeping a tight account with your registrar. So we've got a few questions coming in. So we'll just run through some of those and we'll try and get through as many as we can in the time slot that we've got available, but we've nearly reached that. There's a few there. The first one is, how would an organisation go about regaining control of its domain if it was hijacked?
Well, the very first thing that you would want to do is you want to reach out to your registrar. You have the relationship with them, and you would reach out to them, reach out to their support, and try and gain as much access as you can. And you should have most of the things set in place because you'll have a history with them. They'll be able to look at changes that have happened to your account. Now, the challenge that you could have is if it goes to another registrar, so if they transfer things over, you still want to reach out to your registrar, but you also want to reach out to that other one who has hijacked that domain. Not the registrar, but the individual who's hijacked the domain that's moved it. You want to make sure that you do reach out to that other registrar. And this is also why I was saying that it is important that when you do these types of things, when you're doing stuff with your domain, make sure that you try as best as you can to have good contacts, especially if within your industry. Try and reach out to as many people as you can. You start out with that first thing with working with your registrar, and you may be able to get your domain back pretty quickly that way. But also try and get those two registrars to talk to each other to be able to make sure that they can get everything sorted out. But it's really as fast as you're able to get things resolved. Sometimes has to deal with who you know and who you know to reach out to. But the initial thing, if you have nothing to go on, just reach out to that registrar.
That's great. Thanks, Matt. So we've got time for just one more. How long would it take a hijacked domain to get a low reputation score, and how would you go about rectifying it once the domain is recovered?
So if it's something that is easily detectable, that negative reputation will be almost instantaneous. Now, if the domain was something that was seen as legitimate before, it is likely that it will get put into a different category than certain other domains that may be seen as strictly used for spam. So the main thing that somebody could do is first you need to get control of your domain again. You're going to have that negative reputation regardless. So you need to get control back of your domain. Make sure you get everything changed back, and then once you get everything changed back, that's when you start doing this this outreach to people that may have given you a negative reputation. So it's possible that Spamhaus may have listed you. It's possible that Serval may have listed you, or one of the multitude of other block lists out there may have listed you. So the main thing is get that domain back, fix all your problems, then reach out to those people. And it should be relatively easy for you to be able to find that stuff. There are a bunch of resources out there that I can provide a couple of people where you could do a lookup of multiple block lists to see if there's if somebody does get hijacked. You can do a lookup against that, and then you can reach out programmatically to all of those block lists to be able to clean up your reputation.
That's great. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
That's probably about all we've got time for. So we might just jump onto a few next steps that you might want to take a look at. With Spamhaus, there are a number of technologies available that could potentially assist you with, I guess, preventing any domain hacking. There's a couple of items there: passive DNS and DNS firewall. We've got links there, so take some time to jump onto those links and check them out. There are free demos available, so you can download a free 30-day trial of both of those to take a closer look. So that's about all we've got time for today. The session has been recorded, and we will make that available, I think, on our Pure.Security website. So if anyone did miss it, they'll be able to jump on there, or if you wanted to jump on and have a bit of a refresh, that's going to be available on the website as well. If anyone wanted to have a chat, these are my contact details. Feel free to send me an email or give me a call, and happy to have a chat with you around how else we might be able to help you. So thanks again, Matt, for dropping in and providing that great information and advice. I hope everybody found it useful, and look forward to having you back again when we run another session in probably several weeks' time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.